Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We'll give folks another minute or two to join. Thanks again for joining. Good afternoon, folks who have just joined. We'll start momentarily. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion on how the New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program can facilitate fleet electrification statewide. My name is Ben Mandel. I'm the Senior Director for the Northeast region at CalSTART. CalSTART is a contractor to NYTVIP for stakeholder engagement on this project. And today I'm joined by Liz Markham from NYTVIP, who acts as the program administrator, as well as Rebecca Baptiste and Paul Mallard from the Center for Sustainable Energy, which operates the Voucher Help Center, which you'll hear more about shortly. At the outset, I want to note this session is being recorded, and the recording will be posted to the program website in the coming few weeks. Please do feel free to write out questions in the Q&A window throughout today's session, and we'll address all questions during discussion. We'll begin today's discussion with background on the New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program before highlighting the major changes that have taken effect just this month. Next, we'll provide a snapshot of the program's overall funding sources and describe the requirements for location and vehicle scrappage that may apply based on that funding. After that, we'll cover how much funding your project may qualify for, as well as how to determine how much funding a particular fleet can access. Then staff from the Voucher Help Center will walk through the voucher process itself, including a discussion of all involved parties. And the balance of the time will be left for questions and discussion. We will aim to leave probably the last half hour, if not more, for that purpose. The New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program is a $58.3 million incentive program to facilitate electrification of medium and heavy-duty trucks, transit buses, school buses, as well as port cargo handling equipment. Vouchers are a reservable incentive instrument that reduces the cost of new zero-emission vehicles at the point of sale, which greatly expedites or in some cases may eliminate the payback period associated with these purchases. The program relies on active participation by manufacturers, dealers, as well as fleets to ensure that program requirements are met and that we can get new clean trucks and buses on the roads. This is particularly true for projects requiring scrappage, which is designed to accelerate the removal of the oldest and least efficient diesel engines from New York roadways. So what's new? Well, earlier this month, NYTVIP announced that the voucher program is now a 100% zero-emission program. So this means that any remaining funding for hybrid, natural gas, or propane trucks or buses is now reallocated to battery electric and fuel cell electric funding pots. Another major change is that battery electric projects in certain parts of the state may not be required to scrap a vehicle in exchange for the new vehicle. In these cases, lower incentive amounts apply, and we'll cover this momentarily. Finally, recognizing the global supply chain slowdown, the program has extended the base timeline for voucher redemption from 12 months to 18 months. So this is the time allowable between when a voucher application is approved to when it must be redeemed. Projects that cannot redeem an approved voucher within the 18-month timeframe may request one 6-month extension for a total of 24 months to redeem. The voucher program provides funding for medium and heavy duty vehicles defined as class 3 to 8 vehicles or above 10,000 pounds in gross vehicle weight rating. So this includes on-road trucks, transit buses, school buses, and non-road port cargo handling equipment. Additional categories, though, of on-road vehicles may be supported as long as they're battery electric. And the program can also support battery electric retrofits or repowers, provided that they are certified for 10 years of additional operation. Funding for the voucher program comes from two sources. There's the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program, or CMAQ, which is administered by the New York State Department of Transportation. This source is available to fund class 3 through 8 battery electric vehicles in counties with poor air quality, and we'll share a map of which counties those are. There's also the Volkswagen settlement funding, which is administered by the Department of Environmental Conservation. This funding is available to support battery electric and fuel cell electric projects anywhere in the state, although there may be some requirements around disadvantaged community proximity. In total, these add up to $58.3 million. So as mentioned, there are some disadvantaged community requirements for certain funding pots. In particular, for transit and school buses, the greatest amount of funding is available for projects that are shown to serve disadvantaged communities. This graphic shows an example of a voucher application demonstrating how a school bus route interacts with DACs, in this case proving that the project does indeed benefit disadvantaged communities. To see whether your fleet serves a disadvantaged community, please refer to the NYTVIP DAC locator tool, and we'll drop a link to that in the chat. For DAC projects or truck projects that are also seeking the highest available funding amount, scrappage is still a program requirement. For projects that do require scrappage, fleets must retire a 2009 or older diesel vehicle that is A, still in active operation and meets minimum usage requirements, and B, similar to the new zero emission vehicle they're purchasing. So for instance, a Type C school bus for a Type C school bus, a Class 8 truck for a Class 8 truck, and so on and so forth. Another point to emphasize is that scrappage must occur after the voucher application is approved. We want to make sure that for these projects that are able to retire old vehicles, that it happens at the appropriate time so that we can lock in those higher voucher amounts. As for scrappage itself, scrappage is the certified destruction process of a diesel vehicle with engine model year between 1992 and 2009. And the compliant process requires a 3-inch diameter hole through the engine block, such as through torching, as well as completely disabling the chassis by cutting the frame rails completely in half, or in the case of buses, by cutting the body completely in half. Now, strict adherence to scrappage requirements is really important for the program, so we recommend that a fleet representative attend the scrappage event wherever possible. This will help to make sure that all requirements are met and that they can be documented appropriately. The Voucher Help Center, which you'll hear from in a moment, will work with all voucher applicants and their stakeholders to review and assess the required documentation for sufficiency. Now, of course, not all fleets will have a 2009 or older diesel vehicle that's still in active operation. So there is flexibility for certain types of prospective participants. School bus and truck fleets now have the option to scrap vehicles that they acquire from a third party if they don't have any of their own that meet scrappage eligibility requirements. So here's an example. If a truck fleet wants a new battery electric Class 8 truck but doesn't have any 2009 or older diesel Class 8 trucks that are still being driven at least 5,000 miles per year, they may acquire one from another fleet within New York State that meets the requirements. So again, that's going to concern registration in New York State for the past 2 years roughly, as well as that minimum usage requirement of 5,000 miles annually. But recognizing that some fleets may have let registrations lapse during the early months of the pandemic, we've also made the registration requirement a bit more flexible. So now scrappage vehicles must only have been registered in New York State for 24 out of the past 27 months, which allows for a little bit of lag time for registrations that were let lapse early on. Another relatively recent update is that for class 4 through 7 trucks, there is a bit of additional wiggle room to go up or down as many as 2 class sizes within that 4 to 7 range. So for instance, you can now replace a class 4 truck with a class 6, or replace a class 7 truck with a class 5 for all electric projects. However, as mentioned earlier, as of this month, scrappage is now an optional element if fleets are in eligible parts of the state and they're willing to accept a slightly lower incentive amount. Fleets unable or choosing not to meet either DAC or scrappage requirements may still be eligible for funding through the program now, but at slightly lower levels. We saw on the last slide that the incentive cap goes up to 80% of incremental cost instead of as much as 95 or 100% in the case of the DAC and scrappage projects. In order to qualify for this no scrap option, a project must be located in one of the state's 30 counties designated as having poor air quality, which includes the New York City metro area, the capital region, and some of the more urbanized areas in Western New York, including Rochester and Buffalo. These projects can access funding for class 3 through 8 battery electric vehicles only, which includes repowers. So the ultimate voucher amount does depend on the final sales price. So the voucher amount is based on the applicable percentage of the difference between the sales price and that of a comparable diesel truck or bus, which is submitted during vehicle eligibility. So the funding lines here demonstrate kind of illustrative or maximum limits for the applicable voucher amount in certain categories and weight ranges. The funding lines here for on-road trucks, transit and school buses, and cargo handling equipment all do require scrappage, and you'll notice that these buckets cover 90 to 100% of the incremental cost of these vehicles, subject to weight class specific limits. The quote other funding line does not require scrappage any longer, but it only funds 80% of the incremental cost up to lower weight class specific limits. So who's eligible to participate? Voucher projects may be submitted for any private, public, or nonprofit fleet, with the exception of federal government fleets. In most funding buckets, a single fleet can access no more than 25% of the available funds. So for instance, no single fleet can access more than $2.5 million of the funding that supports scrappage optional projects, right? So this was the $10 million CMAQ bucket described earlier. Now, these 25% limits do not apply for transit and cargo handling equipment categories, which are only available to a small set of beneficiaries. School bus funding has its own caps, including 5 buses per public school district, 2 per private school, 12 per contractor that may be serving multiple districts, and 20 total for New York City schools. Vehicles purchased through the program must be operated for at least 5 years and meet minimum usage requirements discussed on the following slide during that 5-year operational period. We also require periodic data submission from voucher recipients through fleet usage reports for 3 years following the receipt of a voucher. Finally, vehicle lease projects are eligible as long as the lease term is a minimum of 5 years. And in these instances, it's important to point out that the lessor is responsible for complying with ongoing eligibility requirements, including reporting. And so in many cases, they need to be in very close contact with the lessee or the lease operator to acquire that data. As mentioned earlier, both new and scrappage vehicles, where applicable, must meet minimum usage requirements. Together, these in-service requirements ensure that the state's investment in new zero-emission vehicles can maximize the displacement of diesel emissions. These in-service requirements differ by vehicle type, so I will leave this up for a moment so folks can absorb these requirements. Okay, so now I want to turn it over to my colleague Rebecca Baptiste at CSC to walk through the voucher process and which stakeholders are involved.
Thank you, Ben. My name is Rebecca Baptiste, and I'm a Senior Manager of DER and Transportation Programs at the Center for Sustainable Energy. With me today is my colleague Paul Mallard, a Senior Coordinator who is running the day-to-day inquiries that you all are sending in regarding the program and processing the application. When submitting your application to participate in the truck voucher program, there are several involved parties depending on where you are in the stage of the process. So first, manufacturers who are original equipment manufacturers, upfit or retrofit manufacturers, or engine and powertrain producers with vehicles to be sold through the program would submit a vehicle eligibility application for the vehicle to be eligible for the program. Once the vehicle is eligible, then contractors, the next party, would be involved in the next stages of the process. Contractors include dealers and vendors that market and sell approved vehicles through the program and receive voucher payment from NYTVIP. First, they will submit an online contractor application to be eligible to participate in the program. Next, once they are an approved contractor, they can submit online voucher applications for redemption. They are responsible for providing documentation to the Voucher Help Center to redeem the voucher. Finally, vehicle fleets are commercial, nonprofit, or non-federal government fleets that use point-of-sale discounts to purchase or lease a new zero-emission vehicle. They are responsible for scrapping an eligible diesel vehicle, if applicable, and they work with the contractors to supply all information for voucher application and redemption. They are also responsible for compliance with the fleet usage reporting requirement. So all these parties work in conjunction to process applications for the truck voucher incentive program to be redeemed. So an overview of the entire process is shown on this slide. So first, the fleet would initiate a purchase from the contractor and identify a vehicle for scrappage if applicable. The contractor would then submit the voucher application, including the purchaser terms and conditions. NYTVIP will then review the voucher application and, if satisfactory, will reserve the funding for the voucher. Next, the contractor will complete the redemption, documenting the final sale, delivery, and documentation of scrappage if that is applicable for the application. Finally, NYTVIP will review all redemption materials submitted and issue payment once approved. As I mentioned, the Voucher Help Center is your main point of contact for any questions throughout the program process. It is operated by CSC, and we manage the intake of vehicle, contractor, and voucher applications. We also work with NYTVIP to approve or deny and process the applications and are your main point of contact. Provided on this slide is our Voucher Help Center email as well as phone number should you have any questions after this webinar. With that, I'll hand it back to Ben.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. So the last point we wanted to discuss or review with you all before turning to discussion is that charging infrastructure is, of course, a big piece of the equation for fleet electrification, which is going to be the focus for projects going forward now that the voucher program is fully zero emission. So electric utilities throughout the state do have programs in place to facilitate fleet electrification on the infrastructure side. Through a $15 million pilot program instituted in 2020, voucher recipients are eligible for their utility to cover up to 90% of the cost of bringing adequate electric service to their sites. Importantly, these funds don't cover costs on the customer side of the meter, which includes things like the charging stations, but the cost to bring service to the utility, especially where upgrades are required, can be a substantial form of assistance for fleet projects, especially where a lot of infrastructure is being added. You can learn more about this Fleet Make Ready program and get in touch with the right team at your local utility by visiting this link on the Joint Utilities website, which we'll drop in the chat as well. So again, I want to thank everyone for attending this afternoon. We've gone through a good deal of information pretty briskly. As Sarah has mentioned in the chat, I definitely want to encourage folks to go to the website when in doubt to review the very latest implementation manual as kind of the Bible for all program requirements and regulations, and to contact the Voucher Help Center, as Rebecca introduced, for all inquiries related to vouchers or questions or concerns. Now, I think with that, we're ready to go into some of the questions that have been rolling in.
All right. So thank you, Ben and Rebecca, for the presentation. My name is Sarah Stith. I'm a project manager at CalSTART, and I'll be moderating the Q&A. So for the first question, hoping, Ben, you can answer this. If you are getting a vehicle from another company to scrap, do you have to keep the old vehicle until the EV is delivered, or can you scrap it earlier?
Great, thank you, Sarah. So in terms of scrappage timing, the critical point to consider is the date of voucher approval. You want to make sure that if you are requesting incentive funding and you meet the DAC requirement and you're going to scrap a vehicle, that you don't disqualify yourself from that funding by scrapping prematurely. So an applicant needs to wait until the voucher application is approved, and then you've got from that point until 21 days following delivery of the new vehicle to scrap the vehicle, in this case a bus. So you can do that anytime before the vehicle is delivered. In a lot of cases, in the case where you're not procuring a vehicle from a third party for the purpose of scrapping, fleets are going to want to retain that vehicle for operational needs as long as they can. In the case where you are purchasing it or acquiring it in some way from a third party, you just want to make sure that it's done after you get approved for the voucher application.
Thank you, Ben. Next question, can an existing voucher application with scrappage qualify for the new higher funding? I think we'll just need some clarification on that.
Sure, and I'm happy to take that one first. So just to clarify, there is no new higher funding per se. What we've announced this month is that there's more flexibility for the lower funding amount. So we anticipate maybe a higher volume of projects funded through the other line item that don't necessarily require scrappage. But if there was an existing project already in the queue that was scrappage eligible and was on track to receive that funding amount, nothing should have changed about that.
Thank you. Ben, another question for you. Is there class size flexibility for scrappage in the case of school buses?
I know there's flexibility within class 4 to 7 trucks. I may actually defer to Liz on whether this has been explored in the case of school buses, maybe between school bus types.
I was actually researching that. So we do have the most flexibility in the class 4 to 7 truck category, where that allows for you to go up or down to weight classes between the scrappage vehicle and the new vehicle. The school buses and the transit buses need to be similar vehicles.
Thank you, Liz. I have a question for the Voucher Help Center. Once payment is approved, does it get paid to the end user or to the seller?
So payment is directed towards the seller of the vehicle, as they are providing a line item discount in the amount of the truck voucher incentive amount.
Yeah, maybe just to emphasize that point, this program and a few other programs that follow this model nationally have had some success because of their point of sale character from the perspective of fleet purchasers. So fleets don't need to make the added capital outlay at the point of purchase, because as Paul mentioned, the seller has already provided the applicable discount to them when they're making the purchase. And for that reason, it's actually the seller, be that the dealer, or for buses, the manufacturer, that's the applicant and receives the incentive from NYSERDA.
Ben, a question for you, and maybe we can return to the slide. What are the annual mileage requirements for the other vehicles in the other funding category?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. So even though the funding might follow its own kind of line item, depending on the type of vehicle it is, if we're talking about maybe a truck project that just doesn't or chooses not to comply with scrappage, we would still apply the truck in usage or in service requirements for that project. If it's something like a shuttle bus or a category that's not specifically described here, we would need to look at that and try to decide which of these requirements is most applicable.
So this question is for Paul. If an application is declined, are details provided on the reasons for eligibility decisions?
Yes, so applications that are reviewed, we provide details in terms of following up via email directly to the seller or contractor, determining why they are having any portion of their application rejected. So if the application needs to be canceled due to ineligibility, reasoning will be provided.
So another question we have here, how is the vehicle delivery timeframe measured or tracked from a starting date perspective, considering additional upfits beyond the point of vehicle manufacturing? This might be a question for the Voucher Help Center.
So we essentially gauge timelines as from the date of award letter, so the date that a voucher is reserved for the 18-month period, up until the time when the milestone pre and post scrappage photos are provided. So that is the vehicle delivery timeline that we are looking for.
Great, thank you. We have a couple questions on this. If how much funding remains for each category? Ben, do you have that information?
I don't have that information very current. I think Paul or Rebecca may have the most current information for that.
Yeah, I think I can grab the most current funding categories. So for class 4 through 7 trucks, we're looking at about $3.3 million. For class 8 trucks, we're looking at about $2.4 million. For transit buses, we are looking at about $11.3 million. And then for school buses, we are looking at about $1.7 million. And then in the other categories, about $1.8 million.
And Paul, is that factoring in progress applications or just based on what is already reserved?
So that is remaining, including in progress applications.
We have a request to repeat funding availability for class 4 to 8 trucks.
Sure. So for class 4 through 7 trucks, we're looking at about $3.3 million remaining. And that is in progress, including in progress applications. And then for class 8 trucks, we're looking at about $2.4 million. And that's including in progress applications.
Thank you. And we have one related question. Are the voucher remaining dollars applicable to model year 2023?
So in terms of how it relates to the Voucher Help Center, OEMs are welcome to submit for 2023 vehicles. They cannot submit for anything older or newer than 1 year of the current calendar year. So 2023 models are able to be applied for by OEMs. However, you'll see from the eligible vehicles list the current model years that are approved for the program.
Thank you. A question for Liz. So New York now allows for a 12-year lease for electric buses. Will this program allow a 12-year lease?
So the program requirements ask that all leased vehicles have at least a 5-year lease. We do have a 5-year in-service requirement for the program. If the fleet's interested in a longer lease, they're perfectly welcome to do that. The program just asks that you have at least a 5-year lease in place.
So I'm assuming this question was probably answered as well with that, but can a service provider that purchases the truck from a manufacturer and then provides the truck to a fleet through a 3 to 10-year usage agreement apply for the voucher?
Yeah, I can jump in here on this one. So as Liz mentioned, as long as the lease term is more than 5 years, that's an eligible project, as long as it meets all the other requirements. The one mechanical point I would mention there is that the service provider would, in all probability, not be the applicant, because the applicant is generally the seller. So for purposes of the program, the service provider then leasing the vehicle, let's call it a truck, to a lease operator is the beneficiary or the fleet participant, and then needs to work with the lease operator to comply with all kind of reporting requirements and ongoing eligibility.
A question for the Voucher Help Center. Is funding reserved before the award letter? For example, if an application appears to be approvable, when are the funds reserved? Are funds reserved for an in-progress application? So I guess the question is, at what point are the funds reserved?
Yeah, so as it relates to my announcement of which or how much is remaining for each category, in progress is separate from awarded or reserved. Reserved is, or it's considered reserved for the purposes of this program once the award letter has been sent. So the numbers that I had listed are not for, or are not considered reserved. They are considered in progress.
So question for Ben, is the funding available for the other category total for all classes and school buses?
Right, so that's in some senses the most flexible bucket. There's $10 million total in this other category, and that's for any vehicle greater than 10,000 pounds, class 3 through 8, as long as it's battery electric. So that could be school bus, could be certain types of transit buses, theoretically, yard tractors registered for on-road usage in some cases. So it is, in that sense, a more competitive bucket, because any vehicle type that is considered on-road that's battery electric can go for it.
For the Voucher Help Center, how long does it take for a vehicle to become eligible after the application submission? So once they submit a vehicle eligibility application.
Yeah, so the timeline is flexible. Depends on the submission process, whether there's any sort of difficulty in providing acceptable documents to the Voucher Help Center. We then provide them to NYTVIP once they've been deemed acceptable. So they go through a second round of review. I will say that any submission, whether it be the initial submission or resubmission, will have feedback within 10 calendar days of the email submission. So any sort of communication will be sent to the manufacturer that's applying for the vehicle within 10 days. However, vehicle eligibility approval can vary depending on how long it takes for the fleet to provide acceptable documentation.
Paul, can you please restate the amount of funding left in the other category?
Yeah, so it is $1.8 million approximately.
Thank you. A question for either Ben or Liz. Will more funding become available for the program in the future?
I'll leave this one to Liz.
I was going to say I can jump in there. We can't speak to future funding amounts for the program, but there's a lot of work in the transportation industry or area across New York State. So I don't know what that means for the future of the truck voucher program. New York State is committed to the electrification of medium and heavy duty fleets.
There's a question here. I'm assuming that they're asking whether hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles are eligible for this funding.
Yeah, so hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are considered zero emission, and so are definitively part of the program in terms of eligible technologies. Funding in the program can support hydrogen fuel cell on-road trucks or transit buses currently. We're not aware of hydrogen fuel cell school bus technologies, so currently we don't have that kind of combination listed. But in short, yes, hydrogen fuel cell is eligible.
We have a request to go back to the available funding slide.
Not sure if that's this slide or the funding sources slide, but we can put them both up.
Yeah, we can leave those up for a moment. So how much funding can you receive for a Class 8 electric truck if you don't scrap an old truck?
So this would be in the bottom line in this funding table, labeled other. So that would be 80% of the incremental cost of the new electric truck over a comparable diesel, up to a cap of 150,000. So for folks familiar with the program in its initial iteration, which was up until 2018, it's the exact same funding for that scenario as was in place before 2019.
We have a request to restate the funding left for electric school buses, including Class 3.
Absolutely. So Class 3, I will say, I believe only can come from the other funding category. But for Class 4 through 8 school buses, there's approximately 1.7 remaining, including in progress applications. And I can put remaining balances in the chat for all attendees.
If anyone has any further questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or in the Q&A box. Question for Ben. Can you please define what incremental cost means? Does that include the vehicle and infrastructure?
Sure. So the program is designed to really target the incremental cost or the added cost associated with cleaner vehicle technologies. So the powertrain or propulsion system components. So what we really try to isolate when the Voucher Help Center receives an application for a new vehicle model is the cost difference between, let's say, a new all-electric vehicle and a reasonably comparable diesel, a new diesel vehicle of the same make and model configuration, ideally, or something that we can make a case is pretty parallel. So anything that's not directly related to the propulsion system is generally not included in our consideration or calculation of the incremental cost. So we recognize that there are going to be elements associated with the program implementation, including infrastructure and utility interconnection, and we can certainly provide kind of connections to the other stakeholders involved in that. But we are not able to fund any element of the project aside from the vehicle.
We do have an attendee with their hand raised. Steve Dorn, I can allow you off mute to ask your question.
No, you already answered my question, and I appreciate all your help. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Barry, line one. Barry, line one.
All right.
And Paul has placed the remaining balances of funding in the chat, so it'll be easier for everyone to see and take note. We'll allow another moment to let any last questions trickle in. We have another question we've answered, but we can reiterate. So Paul, once payment is approved, does it get paid to the end user or to the seller?
So payments are made directly to the seller as they play the role of the contractor and applicant of the application. And they are providing the NYTVIP voucher as a line item discount. So it reduces the point of sale price to the fleet, and then they, as the contractor seller, are repaid.
We have a question about the school bus funding. So with 1.7 million remaining, will that cover about 7 buses for the entire state, assuming the cost is around $350,000 per bus?
Well, again, I guess the functional amount isn't the total purchase price for these buses, it's the incremental cost. And so it'll depend on the size of the school bus. A type C or D school bus is going to have a higher incremental cost and therefore voucher amount than a type A or B. But it could go as high as $220,000 for school bus projects that include scrappage. And so you can get a decent number out of the remaining funding that's specifically for school buses. And then there will be some additional funding in the other category that could be used for school buses. But again, that's going to compete with other vehicle types. And of course, this reflects that there's been a good amount of interest so far in the program from school bus operators. So hopefully our final tally, once this funding is exhausted for the number of school buses, is certainly well into the double digits.
Question for you, Ben. Is there a list of approved manufacturers, particularly for school buses? Where can we find that list?
Yeah, so Sarah, I'll probably request your assistance to paste the link to the eligible vehicles list from the website in the chat here, so folks have that for easy reference. It's a combined or consolidated list for all vehicle types, but school buses are a category. And we've now removed any of the school buses that had been there in categories no longer eligible, like natural gas and propane. I'll also note that OGS has its own list and our eligibility process is distinct from it. So there may be some overlap, but one is not conditioned on the other, they're separate lists.
I will also drop a link to the page for manufacturer information for participation in the program, where you'll find a link to download the vehicle eligibility application. We did get some questions about that. So it looks like we have addressed all the questions we received. We do have more time if anyone has remaining questions.
Really want to thank everyone for their time and attention this afternoon. As mentioned, we'll post a recording of this session on the website for quick reference, and we'll notify folks once that's up. And we'll also circulate a copy of the slides we presented to anyone who's registered for the session. We can hang on for a few more minutes if there are lingering questions, but otherwise want to thank everyone for their time.